Hope you're having a good day today. Thank you for joining me. We are going to be looking at Elisha and the widow with the oil today. Our hymn, it's the hymn Jesus Paid It All, pardon me.
Gone is all my debt of sin, a great change is brought within, and to live I now begin, risen from the fall. Yet the debt I did not pay, someone died for me one day, sweeping all the debt away. Jesus paid it all. Jesus died and paid it all. Yes, on the cross of Calvary. And my starting heart was melted at his dying call. Oh, his heart in shame was broken on the tree for you and me. Yes, and the debt is cancelled. Jesus paid it all.
All right, let's look at our passage now. We are in 2 Kings chapter 4 at verse 1. A certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets cried out to Elisha, saying, Your servant, my husband, is dead. You know that your servant feared the Lord, and the creditor is coming to take my 2 sons to be his slaves. So Elisha said to her, What shall I do for you? Tell me, what do you have in the house? And she said, Your maidservant has nothing in the house but a jar of oil. Then he said, Go, borrow vessels from everywhere, from all your neighbors, empty vessels. Do not gather just a few. And when you have come in, you shall shut the door behind you and your sons, then pour it into all those vessels, and set aside the full ones. So she went from him and shut the door behind her and her sons, who brought the vessels to her, and she poured it out. Now it came to pass, when the vessels were full, that she said to her son, Bring me another vessel. And he said to her, There is not another vessel. So the oil ceased. Then she came and told the man of God, and he said, Go, sell the oil and pay your debt, and you and your sons shall live on the rest. It's an interesting account, isn't it? What points might we make? Well, one is the idea of, he says, What do you have? What do you have? And that's what, it's the same question the Lord asks us, in a way. What do you have? What do you have? And the amazing thing is that the Lord can do a whole lot with very little. A little boy only has a few bread and a few fish. We could feed 5,000 people. A widow only has 2 mites. She's given more than anybody else. Someone has a little bit of fragrant oil. She's done what she could. You see the lesson repeated throughout Scripture. What do you have? If it's only 1 talent, based on your ability, you better use that talent. He asks the woman, What do you have? Have a little bit of oil. And guess what? It's going to be used. Go start gathering the vessels. The whole thing starts, though, with she has a debt. There's a debt. Her husband has passed away, and he was a godly man. But the creditor was coming to take the 2 sons to be slaves. So there are debts that have to be paid. And Elisha says this is how they're going to be paid. He doesn't say, don't worry about it. It's, nope, do this. Go sell the oil, pay your debt. You and your sons live on the rest. We'll talk about the rest here in a second, but pay your debt. And I was thinking about that idea of debt. Sometimes I would suggest we get something wrong about certain aspects of the old covenant and the new covenant. The law of Moses, as well as the blessings found in Jesus. What I mean by that is a passage that is spoken about, and it's the passage that explains, and and helps us to understand, if we will consider it, what the Lord calls for. Because what the Lord calls for, before we read the passage, in Him there is no darkness at all. And we are called to be holy as He is holy. Wait a minute, how can sinners be holy? How can, since all have come short of the glory of God, how can we be holy? By the way, all coming short, that's Romans. That's Romans. 1 John is the passage that talks about it. In Him there is no darkness at all. 1 John talks about, in the same context, if we confess our trespasses, He is just, He is faithful, and He will forgive us, cleanse us from all unrighteousness. That's how. That must be how. That is how. That is how we are able to have fellowship with God, who is holy. That's how we're holy. It's through Jesus. It's through the power of His forgiveness. When we think about the old law, and we recognize the old law demanded perfection, it demanded absolute holiness. Now, the problem with the old law was that the blood of bulls and goats does not take away sins. But that's what the law demanded. The law demanded holiness. Well, guess what? In Romans chapter 8 at verse 3, it talks about this very thing. For what the law could not do, in that it was weak through the flesh, God did by sending His own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh on account of sin. He condemned sin in the flesh, that the righteous requirement of the law might be fulfilled in us who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. The righteous requirement of the law. Through Jesus, that is how it is able to be fulfilled in us. This is how sinners are able to fulfill that, the righteous requirement of the law. And the only reason I bring that up is because of our passage. Good grief, I don't know where this thing's going. Back in 2 Kings chapter 4, the widow. There's a debt. Something has to be paid. And Jesus did not just ignore the debt. He paid it. He gave His life. He gave His blood. And while we're thinking about His blood, pardon me, I keep trying to sneeze right now. While we think about His blood, we think about this oil. And did you notice what Elisha said? Go sell the oil and pay your debt, and you and your sons live on the rest. You know, this is sort of like the feeding of the 5,000. If the Lord wanted to, He could have made just enough to feed everybody. But there were leftovers. And He tells the disciples, He tells the apostles, take up the baskets of fragments. There is more than enough. More than enough. My cup runneth over. The oil, the Lord could have done this just enough that she had just enough to pay her debts. But there is more. And as an application, as we think about the Lord's sacrifice, we simply say, where sin abounded, grace abounded much more. Much more. The Lord's grace is not just enough. The Lord's grace, the power of the Lord, the power of the Lord's grace, the power of the Lord's sacrifice, the power of the Lord's blood, it's much more, worth much more. Where sin abounded, grace abounded much more. Appreciate you as we think about these lessons and applications. Jesus paid it all. Hope you have a good day. Join us tomorrow for another portion of our daily praise.